Good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Abhinav Agarwal from Indica Books, and this is your Indica Books Writers Open House with Otis. And you know the drill. You send in pieces, Otis reviews them, sends them back to you. We use this open house to discuss those pieces. This is your opportunity to not only see other people's writing and what kind of feedback is provided, but also to ask your own questions on the craft of writing, whether it is point of view, whether it is, well, your voice point of view, and all the other different nuances of writing and the craft of writing that we often admire subconsciously when we read good writing works from other authors. But I think we may not always be able to translate that experience of having read good writing into the mechanics that go into, or the rules that should be followed, or at least we have to know the rules before we can consciously say that we have decided to break some rules in writing. So all of those wonderful things are what we discuss here, what we should discuss here. So do make it interactive. Ask Otis questions, prove him wrong, or try and prove him wrong. That would be one of my joys. I hope to see one day. So there are okay. So Otis, without further ado, I'll turn this over to you.
I love how you bait the crowd. You're like, you're like throwing chum in the water. It's like, there he is. Let's chum the water. Let's go ahead and shark attack.
I've been spending too much time on Twitter. I'll confess.
Okay, I spend zero time on Twitter.
That's why you
my
write
my
more than I do.
I spend no time at all on Facebook. Not only do I spend no time on Facebook, I also sometimes my partner will start telling me something and I'll say, "Is that from Facebook? Are you telling me something from Facebook now?" Because I'm purposely not on Facebook. And you're now reading things on Facebook and then talking about them in the house. It's like having an Alexa, that's, you know, it's like you're not even asking it. Like what's on Facebook is like bringing it. It's automatic. My God. Um, Abhinav, I really liked what you said about subconsciously appreciating in good writing. I think that that's exactly right. That's because that's the level. This is the level that we want to be at. It's like we don't. I've said this pretty often. I've been in a lot of writing workshops. I've had to take them in order to achieve all the basically meaningless advanced degrees that I have, and I've noticed this thing, like when everyone's in a workshop and it's been with, great people, they will say, "I love this sentence." And basically, when they say, "I love this sentence," it means that they noticed it and they noticed it as good writing. And to me, that has begun to sound like the kiss of death. When the
Mm.
reader notices, right? When the reader notices the writing,
Ah, yes.
when they or if they I mean, definitely, as I've said before, it's like the two main poles that we want to avoid are confusion on the one side and boredom on the other. Those are these are the, what is it? I don't know how you say it. Cerebus? Is it Cerebus? The dogs of hell, the two
Oh,
heads of the
yes,
hellish
yes, yes.
dog. Right, right, right. So those are this is the Cerebus for us, confusion and boredom. But the other one is definitely noticing the good writing. We don't want our reader to be noticing anything. We don't
So
want them to be, does
essentially,
that
you're
make
saying that, one of the cardinal rules of writing that we must be aware of is do not preen when writing.
Preen? Yeah, yeah. Um, I think it's great. I think it's great for us to, aspire, but it's not actually about, we're not trying, we don't want, like, if we think about this confusion, the reader becomes, fractured in their way, or they become bored, they start thinking about other things. But when we write good writing that the reader notices, they're thinking about us. They're thinking about us, the writer. And that's not our job. We actually don't want them to be thinking about us. We want them to be in the story. So, Ram, let's start with your piece.
Yes, sure.
Ram, we thanks for sending a couple pieces. I read the first one of the Sita stories, and then I also read the short piece that I think you're kind of writing in response to the Ukraine invasion. Um, so I actually haven't. I think we can talk about both of those. I didn't read the second Sita piece, so I'm hoping that maybe we can look at this first Sita piece, and let's just start in our, kind of start in our regular routine. If you could read some of it, and then talk a little bit about what you're um, looking to do, or actually, why don't you talk a little bit about what you're looking to do, and then read some. So
Okay,
I'll hand it over to you.
right. Uh, in the Sita story, the story started off in response to a submission for a short story contest. It was more for a submission for that. That's where it started, and I started writing. The One of the purposes or the guidelines was that to pick up any historical personality, to pick up any story, well known story, folktale, mythology, any of this, and write it in a way that it appeals to a young adult audience. A young adult is an audience that I have never thought about or never written for. So I said that, okay, why don't I try it? It might be interesting. Because when I look at my younger relatives, nephews, and nieces, they are not very familiar with the mythology, with the epics. They're not familiar with the epics. So I said that, okay, what will make them relate to it? Because I see a lot of them reading Harry Potter, they read Lord of the Rings, read a lot of other whatever sci-fi or fantasy genre that is there. I see them reading all of that, but not many of them are, at least the ones I know, are not reading the epics. Then I started thinking, can I write some part of the story? And then I thought that all these epic characters, they were young adults at one point of time, right? So they became older. These IP characters became older. They did a lot of fantastic things. We read about them, we worship them, we revere them. That's the divinity part of it. But there is also human part of it, because these divinities, they came to us in human form, what we call as avatar, right? And there's a certain bounds within which they had to act. Like in the Ramayana, Rama could have killed Ravana with his fantastic powers in a moment, but he went through the entire trials and tribulations of a human being. So was he human before he became divine? Was he divine when he came, when he already came as a human? I think those are some of the questions, but they were young adults at one point of time. So what went on in their mind? What did they think? What did they do? It might be stripping the divinity away from them, but I think that also helps us to get closer to these personalities. If I put them on a
Hmm.
pedestal, maybe it is difficult for me to get closer to them. But which is why we have all these folk tales, right? Where we have these folk songs about a mother feeding her baby Krishna, or a mother singing a lullaby to the baby Rama. They have these so that they are more human. We get closer to them. So I started wondering if something like that could be done. And we know a lot about Sita from the time Rama married her. Before that, what happened to her, we don't know. There is some amount of information that is available in the epic, so I thought that why not use that and maybe construct a story. And that's when I thought that maybe I can put it in a frame structure, in an envelope structure, where it is another young adult who is trying to relate to this epic character. So that's how it started. When I started writing, it was going in a particular direction. And the first part I had shared with you in one of the submissions for the Sunday sessions. And that was very eye opening, because I could see where that was going wrong. And I could see that it was headed in a particular direction that was going to set up a straw man. That was not the objective, because it can be as simple as the mother telling the daughter, you have to read this, otherwise you don't get food, right? But it would not achieve the objective. So then I said, instead of the mother telling the daughter about the character, can the daughter discover the character herself? Then I said, okay, instead of the mother narrating a folk tale or the stories from the Ramayana, can the daughter recreate it? Because I thought that maybe something like that a young adult might relate to better when they have an opportunity to do that. Because a friend's daughter who is also a young adult, she with a group of couple of friends, she has written a novella about the Second World War from a young adult's perspective. So I thought that, okay, this young children, they are very talented, why not do it like that? So that's what I did, and I had a particular direction in mind when I started writing, but as it often happens, the characters had a story of their own to tell, and that's how the story came about. So that was a sort of a long-winded answer, so I'm sorry for boring all of you.
Yeah. Well, you said a lot of interesting things in there that I feel like I want to comment on, but it was like so much, so I'm sort of trying to select a couple things that I wanted to get
Right.
back to, but then
Sure.
there was more, Ram. There was more.
Sorry for rapping.
Um, One of them is, well, one, you mentioned this idea of like a human being, they become an avatar. They sort of become an avatar for the god,
Right.
right? So it's like this sort of like receiving of this kind of divine um, thing, sort of eventually. I like that idea because it sounds, in a sense, it sounds real. It's not just mythic.
Mm.
It sounds like a process, and the way we know life is as a process. It isn't something that's simply, instantaneous. I really like that. I liked a little bit what you were saying about Harry Potter, which made me think about this work a little bit because it has magical elements,
Yes.
and in this piece right here, I'm not sure that we'll get to that, but she lifts up the bow
Yeah.
of um, help
Shiva.
me, of
Shiva.
Shiva, which Shiva, which cannot no one has lifted.
Yeah.
And in a sense, the way you write it, it could be interpreted as no one even tries to lift it,
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yeah.
Right, because
That's
no
what
one's
I've done.
allowed to go into the temple, and no
Yeah.
one gets that far. It's like you can't lift it, and you can't lift it. And so it's nice that it functions in that sort of reality place, but also there's something interesting about sort of um, I mean, clearly this idea of sort of a kind of magic, um, and even, walking the line between magic and a reality is a pretty interesting line to walk on too.
Mm.
Um,
True.
so, I mean, that's sort of indicated in Harry Potter, but it's also so very much alive in one of my favorite works, which is A
Right.
Hundred Years of Solitude, which I'm not sure if you've read that, but if
I
you
have read it.
haven't, it's
I read it,
absolutely,
and
yeah.
I was depressed for many days after reading it because it shook me. I was really depressed for a few days after reading it.
I was depressed also, but I was depressed also because it was over.
Oh,
You
okay.
know, I mean, like that book impressed me so much with this sense of like, I mean, for a while, I mean, it's funny. I had almost exact. I was like stunned. I felt a sense of being stunned afterwards, and I'm pretty sure that this was the case. That I had this table. It was like a Lazy Susan table. It was kind of cool from the 50s. You could spin the whole thing around. It was
Okay.
kind of cool. It was red, and 100 Years of Solitude sat on that table for like 3 or 4 days. I just didn't even put it away, and I would stare at it sometimes, and I'd be like, because I knew what would happen if I opened it, right? I knew
Right.
that there was this, right? I knew that there was this world inside of it. It was like,
Yes. Yeah.
the thing that it does to your imagination and your
Yeah.
brain is inside there. And all you have to do is open the cover. I was just like, I'm telling you, that's my aspiration to write a book where someone
Yeah.
finishes it and they stare at it and they know what's inside and they're like, "Oh my God." And they're unsure whether they want to go there or not, but they know that it's definitely a
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Um, well, that sort of I think what Gabriel Garcia Marquez kind of creates in that is this sense of a kind of consciousness,
Mm.
and you enter that consciousness, which no longer has the rules of regular consciousness.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
its own production made with
Yeah.
those words. And so that's something that you could be thinking about too.
No, that's interesting that you should say that. I'm sorry to interrupt you here because normally when we read stuff like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, there is a willing suspension of disbelief. But when I read Marquez, it was like the disbelief was never there.
I know, right?
It
Yes,
was not
exactly.
suspicion of disbelief. It's just that, right? I mean, you're just drawn into it.
Yeah, you're just like, what? The blood
Yeah,
is flowing backwards up. I mean,
yeah,
it's one thing to have the blood
yeah.
flowing down, but it's flowing backwards up to the house. And it's like,
Right. And he does
this,
it like in that instance where everybody forgets the names of things, so they have to write notes and stick it on objects so that they can remember what it is and what it is used for. It seems so believable.
it's amazing. It's amazing work. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I like what you're talking about in terms of the, uh, some of these ideas that could be magical or they could be real, and in a way to actually, maybe it is sort of removing them from that mythic quality, that sort of it's not dogmatic, but to make them sort of
Accessible.
doctrinary. Yeah, to make them doctrinary works that that basically you're being forced to accept, right?
Hmm.
You accept it or you don't. That's coming from the outside to you. Instead, to make it something that exists within the world that you simply are being immersed in. That's a really interesting idea.
So
And
here,
then,
what I was trying to do is not to challenge or question or even rationalize the divinity or the miracles. There are a lot of books which rationalize this. They give sometimes even stretched and warped scientific explanations of how that happened. I was not sure if that is really important, because here I wanted to focus on the human angle of it. Yes, there is a divinity, there are certain miraculous things, but at the same time, these were humans. They were people. So what was that part? So the divinity becomes subordinated to that, where it really does not matter whether it is divine, whether it is rational, whether it is scientific, whether it is fantastic. That really doesn't matter in the story. But what matters is, as a person, like in the story, the Sita that I saw in my mind, she wanted to be a normal girl. She didn't want to be put on a pedestal. She wanted to chase after, whatever frogs or parrots or whatever they do, play with her sister, gossip with her friend. She wanted to do that. Wouldn't she have wanted to? I thought she would.
well, and the thing that you are having guide you is the thing that I think is most important. How do you get that reader to read your work? Right?
Yes.
That that's
Yes.
that's the guide. So like with that as the guide, how do you do
Right.
it? The
Yes.
the the audience that you might have for this piece, let's say, your cousin, you can think of your cousin, a little girl is going to read it. How does she read this piece? Well, she's not going to read the piece because, the way you framed it at first, basically you have to read it for your own good,
Yeah.
right? She's already getting plenty of that. We're not trying to write things that people are being forced to read, because that
Yeah.
requires a whole bunch of other infrastructure. We have to arrive into the canon. We have to be, and then who's going to be forcing? Is it going to be some professor who's going to assign your book? And
Yeah.
even then, most people are not going to read it. They're still going to be on their phones and doing their Twitter. So
Yeah.
we're finally writing for an audience, and so we have to figure out what are the keys for writing for an audience. And the primary key basically is what I, fancy words maybe, but I call it sympathetic resonance with the protagonist. I see me in the protagonist. This is the foundation of our work, I believe. So that means if I see me in them, then I also am going to, in a sense, learn a lesson of life and life experience, and also without having it, through them. That's a very convenient way to learn things. Like I get to learn about, I mean, we want to have our stories be about a struggle to survive. That is the universal element between all people. And if I can see my life in theirs, that means I can sit here casually in my we like to be safe. We like to be safe. And I can be here and feel safe and read the story about someone's struggle, someone's dire struggle in a position of safety, but about experiences that are inherently not safe, right? And see what that character does and basically learn what I might do or might not do based in the same experience. So I get to learn. We are learning machines. We are trying, I mean, we're not really reading for fun. We're not really doing anything for fun. We're in a constant state of survival, and we're learning things in order to survive, and reading is one of them. So, um, yeah, so great. I think I think it's really good, and you're getting there. So let me ask you this: we're still going to read a little bit, but what is the most difficult challenge in doing that, Ram? Do you find?
In getting the reader to read, in getting sympathetic resonance, the biggest challenge is that the protagonist is not me. That I
Yeah.
think is the biggest challenge.
Okay. Yes, you're right. You're right. So you have
Yeah.
here a girl who starts out at maybe 7 or even younger, and then she's 10 later on. She might even start
Yeah.
out at like 3 or
Five. She
4.
starts at five. She starts at
Yeah.
five.
So you're starting that. So you're writing about this girl, and the biggest trouble is that you're Ram, right? You're an adult man, and you're writing about this girl, and you're trying to create her experience. So let me ask you this: how do you do that?
So I think back to whatever little I remember of my childhood. I mean, I dig into my memories, and then I look at more recent memories, like the children in my neighborhood, my nephews and nieces, my interaction with them. So I try to see if I can, gather something from the observations, from the memories. Can I bring some of that in? I think it's more of an unconscious thing. It's not that I'm thinking consciously that, okay, 5 years back my niece was 5 years old. What did she do? I'm not doing that, but I think that is what I'm probably trying to draw on. I am sure I don't remember what I did when I was 5 years old. Maybe I was
Yeah.
being potty trained. That's probably what was happening. But
Okay. I right. So and you were saying a little bit, you look at your nieces and you look at these kids, but I am going to really try and emphasize this. Okay, here's the light. I do I do this with my daughters, but they really make fun of me. I was like I do it as a joke. I was like, you must ask yourself why. And they're like, you ask yourself why, Dad. Okay, so we have to turn this light inward
right.
because the it's basically you have to figure out how you are the same as that girl. We have to find out how we are the same. We have to look into ourselves and we have to understand ourselves. And it's not actually, in a sense, with this great distance. Okay, so you're saying I got to remember when I was a kid. So when you talk about remember myself when I was a kid, there's a huge distance between you and the person you're trying to remember. But
Yeah.
actually, you don't have to remember them because you're a human being. You are
Mhm.
driven by the same things that every other
Yes.
human being on earth is driven by.
Yes.
So all you have
Yes.
to do is be right here and turn that light and try and understand your own struggle for survival,
Mhm.
your own truest self, in a sense, and
Mhm.
then you apply it to the girl. And so
Mhm.
and you actually are accomplishing that to some degree here, but it's like what what I think ends up when we try to write, it doesn't actually matter who the protagonist is that we're writing. The protagonist is central to our story, and we as the writer have to know them. We know our protagonist, and this is easier said than done, I know, by knowing ourselves. That's
Mhm.
we by knowing ourselves honestly. This gets to the famous Ernest Hemingway sentence. His maxim: write one true sentence. I think that writing that one true sentence is finding that place between the ourselves and our character, that true expression of who we are. Who we are and who they are. It's simultaneous. It's one thing. Um, and I think you're kind of getting to that a little bit here. You know,
Okay.
um, not perfectly, not perfectly yet,
Mhm.
but somewhat. And so, and when we're writing that sentence, that one true sentence, whatever it is, that sort of sympathetically resonant, true thing that exists between us all, then we'll take that up here. Let me put this up here like a our reader reads that and they see themselves,
Hmm.
right? That's the
Oh,
subconscious.
okay.
So, so, so going Abhinav was talking about the subconscious thing that we're experiencing. This
Right.
is on the deepest level. There's tons of stuff. There's like little grammar and blah blah blah, and all the little incidental details. But this is the juice. That's what I would say. This is the real
Right.
thing where we have made a true witness of ourselves without our filters and our biases and our judgments. We've then been able to see that also in our character, and we put it on the page, an
Hmm.
expression of the self without judgments, exterior judgments. We want to cover the truth of the world and all of that too, the outside world, but we want to try and reach this sort of true expression of self so that when in the privacy of someone's home, they don't have to read your work.
Right.
But what they read is they read this expression of themselves, right? They're
Hmm.
not reading about Sita, they're reading an
Right.
expression of
Yes.
themselves.
Yes. No, this is interesting because just like I am not the protagonist, the reader also is not the protagonist. But what is common is the human struggle. It's common to all three, and that's where they identify with it.
Yeah. Right.
Wow, okay.
I think we
Right.
can we can make a certain so our understanding of what that human struggle is and the expression of the soul, if we want, of a human being in action is more difficult than just thinking about struggle, okay? Because
Hmm.
struggle is just a word, right? So we're it's a word that we're inadequately trying to give to this other kind of expression, this higher expression. But yeah, that's right. That's right. You don't. You're not. I mean, at the end of the day, right? And I've said this before about my work. I'm not just seeking to write for a certain audience. I'm seeking to write for every single person that opens up that book.
Right. Right.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah. So I, I think that you're on the right track. I mean,
Wow.
we
Okay.
we we get we get on the right track when we really honor, and this is a great transition in this work. You move from this idea of writing a straw man basically by creating an argument that you need to read
Yes.
this, and we know
Yes.
that we I don't know, man. You meet my girls, you're not going to make them do anything, Rom. They're not going to and then as soon as you say you have to, as soon as it even has that tone, oh my god, you are going to get a lot of resistance. um, Milgram himself found that. So you have to find a way to basically depend on they want to read it. And
Hmm.
so it's not reading it for their own good. You have to find something that's deeper and truer about, really, finally, about us all. We all want to take in the world. We're not trying to resist the world. We want to take it in and we want to survive and we want to flourish. And so we put the things on the page that are going to help our reader do so. I mean, I still remember, I didn't express it in this way at all, but I remember, in my experience, and I think probably all of us who have come to writing have had good experiences with reading. My good experience with reading was at a certain point, I mean, things seemed really tough. And quite honestly, I was reading some things that were very, very dark, like disturbing. But but I still had this feeling like, wait a second, this is the thing that no one has ever told me before. This is a secret. They're not telling me the things that I need to hear because they think I do. They're just,
Right.
it's just there. I'm just connecting with these experiences and taking something from it for myself. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and so that's great. You're on the right track.
Thank you.
Let's Let's have you read the first page.
Okay. We
Uh,
can't
can
see
you
it.
can you share screen, Otis?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I thought I had done that.
All right.
You
The
see that
first
now?
page.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll just read that. Yeah. Oh, this is called Part 2, The Girl Who Had No Friends. Within the palace walls, things changed drastically. Sunaina, fully convinced of Sita's divinity, spoke to the 5-year-old as if she were speaking to a sage 500 years old. She no longer cuddled Sita. Janaka waited for Sita to finish her meals and then ate from her plate. The serving girls and guards spoke to her with their heads bowed and eyes lowered. Initially, Sita reveled in the adoration but tired of it soon. The girls who used to taunt kept a safe distance from her. Sita caught whiffs of their conversation, but the whispers turned to silence the moment she approached. She wished they would taunt and bully her, if only to feel normal. The event that had started it all, Sunaina's pregnancy, had resulted in a girl child, Urmila. Sita was thrilled, but Urmila was born into the aura of Sita's divinity. Sita pulled Urmila's hair, pinched her cheeks, and snatched away her toys, hoping that a complaint would reach Janaka or Sunaina. She waited for the people who she called father and mother to reprimand her, twist her ear in warning, maybe even box her ears, but none of that happened. Why don't you cry when I pull your hair, when I take away your toys? Why don't you complain to mother? Sita asked Urmila. Because Urmila stammered, because you are special. Sita, now 10 years old, ran to the garden to be with the only one who never left her side, the earth. It was summer and the soil was dry. Sita lay down on the bare earth, sobbing.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I think that this is I really think you're on the right track. So
Okay.
I let me make a couple comments to sort of just maybe lead you, what I will think of as a little bit truer, you know. I guess that would be the way to express it. Okay, so and it really has it again probably comes down to these issues. I really is playing such a big role in my work right now. I think a lot about distance. This is it's
Okay.
maybe like the cumulative thing that I have coming out of basically a lifetime of trying to write, for others is and to write characters that are real. Is there this issue of distance and the way words um, give us a sense of that distance.
Mhm.
Okay, so just as examples, so within the palace wall, things changed. So change is obviously a very big grouping and vague word, but it suggests a lot of distance. So I don't mind it. It's really, in its way, it's kind of bold. But within the palace walls, things changed. You'll see I add this drastically, some said. So like I'm adding this little thing. It seems so small, but it's like I'm basically focusing. Does that make sense? Between those
Right.
two
Yeah, yeah,
sentences,
yeah,
the
yeah.
one
I
that's
get it.
huge, and now I'm like bringing it down to wait, these are stories that people are talking
Mm.
about. I'm directing I'm directing the movement of this work to go deeper.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
I get it. It's like instead of saying, making a blanket statement, the world is a bad place, if I say that the world is a bad place, that's what my grandfather used to say.
Yeah, right. So now I'm
Yeah.
my world is
More
becoming
specific. Oh, okay.
yeah, right. So um within the palace walls things changed drastically, some said.
Yeah.
Sana Sanayan, sorry, I can't my but so this character fully conceived of Sita's divinity spoke to the 5-year-old if she were speaking to a sage 500 years old. She no longer cuddled Sita. Um, Janaka waited for Sita to finish her meals and then ate from her plate. The serving girls and guards spoke to her with their head bowed and eyes lowered. Okay, so I like it. That's great. I feel this sense of because we're moving from things
Mm.
changed, palace walls, things changed drastically, some said, and now I have these various minor characters
Right.
and what they're doing in regard to Sita. So that's all good. We're actually, I think we're getting the movement that we like, that I like. And then we land on initially Sita reveled into adoration, but tired of it soon. Okay, so this is too much. To
Oh,
me, what you've done is you've done the work of getting to her, and I think that you're writing something here in summary that's true. This is very often the case with us as writers. We we basically have an idea and we write it down, and then we go about proving that our idea is right because we know
yes,
we need to get down to
yes.
like actions of character and stuff like that. So we have the idea, and it's like,
Okay.
oh, I see. Probably she was like liked it at first, but then she didn't like it. Okay, I'm gonna say you're probably right, um, but the way you've written about it does not show that you really know it.
Hmm.
Right?
Right.
Because it's easy to say this. This is like some psychologist, like some child psychologist being like, well, at first she liked it, of course, like I would like it, right? But then
Right.
she got tired of it because da da da, right? So that has distance. What you need to do is do that work where you can really go into this character in order to write what does it
Hmm.
mean to revel? What does it mean to revel in adoration? What is the
Hmm.
feeling? What gets said and what is your response?
Hmm.
Right? And then what is it? What is this transition? I mean, you're covering so much, but tired of it soon. Why? What's going on? So like, well, in a vague sense, you've like, it's sort of like scattershot, right? This is a
Hmm.
scattershot. You've you're basically right. It's scattershot in the right direction, but it's not showing us that you really know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
And because you're not showing what you really know what you're talking about, because it still has what I'm going to characterize as distance from the character's experience, I'm not convinced in subconsciously, right? The
Hmm.
Abhinav is right. It's subconsciously, I'm not convinced that you really know this character. I am, as I'm reading those words, I'm still distant.
Hmm.
So I don't know that you're really going to get on the page the real goods. And if I'm, whether I'm a 10-year-old girl or whether I'm me, right? I mean, I'm just I'm just studied in reading these things and feeling my own experience because I'm ready to go with you, Ram. I'm ready to be this girl. But you got to show me that you're that girl too.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Not this guy up here, these many centuries later, um, who doesn't really know, who's just taking a scattershot at, an attempt.
Hmm.
So but you're going in the right direction. And
So
then
here,
all of
here,
this,
sorry. Here it almost sounds like as a writer, I am telling you, therefore this is what it is. You better accept it.
yeah, yeah,
That's how
and
it's feeling
and
like.
so it's a choice. Maybe do I accept that? Do I accept that sort of pedantic description of what this girl is like, or do I not accept it? I'm not going to leave things to chance like that.
Interesting. But that's a challenge that we will face when we are trying to compress time, right? Because we will have to make sweeping statements when we compress time.
Well, I think if you're this isn't exactly compressing time.
This is
This
not, I agree.
is right.
This is
So
mm,
we do want to organize our work. Really, we want to understand our work so much like this. We're basically just working with, let's say, one, two, three, four things. There's only four things that we're ever going to be writing. Okay. There we go. There we go. We're done. Four things. One is going to be scene. Scene is basically slowing time down to some degree, writing something that's like, that like we might experience in life. We can slow things down even more than that, we know, right? We can do super slow, we can do slow mo and super slow mo. We can really focus on things if we want to and write them longer than they actually take. He drew back his hand and let it go. It flew through the air at 15 miles per hour. A fly batted away from this, and then struck his face, right? So that takes a lot longer. So we can slow things down, but it's basically talking about scene. Summary, we'll talk about narrative summary. Narrative summary is basically following the events. Narrative is basically a sequence of events, and narrative summary means that we're going to compress time and write those narrative sequences faster.
Okay.
I might argue, Ram, I think I will argue. Someone proved me wrong. There's no time to write a summary. If we're writing a narrative, narrative is essentially anti-summary. Narrative is a sequence of events. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. We as writers, when we're writing, we often write summaries in order to understand it, and then we start writing the sequence of events afterwards. I will basically counsel cut out that summary. So I'm not sure that summary is something that we want to use. Narrative summary means, narrative summary is about compressing time. I walked to the back of the convenience store. I saw the blood on the floor. I saw the gun. I saw, the spilt milk. I ran out of the store. Okay. That's a summary of my experiences. I'm not writing it like I turned, I looked at the door, I moved my foot, I moved my other foot. I'm not writing it like that. That's slowing down, right? I ran out of the store. That's a summary of my actions of running out of the store. I ran down the block. At the end of the block, I turned left and ran into the police station. Someone's been murdered, I said, right? So I basically hurried up time, and that is a transition. That is a transition. So I write a scene, I write a summary transition, and then I'm going to write another scene. There's another kind of thing that we write. Basically, I'm going to call it in general parenthetical information. Parenthetical means it has a parentheses. This is a place where we might have a summary, right? So parenthetical means in this scene of narrative events, right? We're moving event, whatever it is, event. I ran out of the store, parenthetical, the convenience store on the corner, right? Parenthetical. So basically, the thing that defines the parenthetical is that it is not the narrative. It stops the momentum of the narrative.
Okay.
Understanding those two forces, basically creating momentum and stopping momentum, is basically our superpower. This is rhythm. That's rhythm in writing. It is the sound of the drum beat and the pause of the drum beat. The sound and the silence, if you will. Time moving forward, and then static material, which is unusual. And then, let's see, so that's one. So scene, narrative summary, parenthetical expression, which can be backstory or anything else, and it's used to stop the momentum. And then the last thing that we have to work with is everything we don't include. Woo. Okay, so anyway, that was just a long comment on you trying to say that this was a summary.
Right.
But I do want to take this just a little bit. I want to take this just a little bit further. So I would try and dig into, I think you have to slow this down. You have to have her revel in the adoration. Then you might hurry up time, right? You might hurry up time while she has this adoration to show this soon, tired of it soon. You need to hurry up that time and then show this transition into her becoming tired of it. She noticed that nobody touched her anymore. No one held her. when they spoke to her, they used a certain tone, right?
Mm.
Um, so we we want to move through what you've written here, not as a summary, but as a sequence of events that either
Mm.
you slow down with and give us specific details, or you speed up, but not a summary of the entire thing. Um, and then she wished she could taunt and bully her if only to feel normal. So normal again is like, I'm not sure that that's really getting to the truth of it. I mean, I wrote
Mm.
close, um,
Right.
but it does correspond to what we know. Like we can know as, like, let's say, psychologists, and we can know about ourselves. If we do not get attention that's positive, we'll seek attention that is negative,
Right.
right? Um, that's not a comment on kids. That's a comment on us,
Right.
right? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, it does.
we
That's more
should not
specific.
look at things. We and for us as writers, we should come to that not because we read some journal about child psychology. Do not write it because you're reading a journal about child psychology. Write it because you understand it in yourself. It's true of yourself. There's nothing we want more than connection with other human beings. This is absolutely essential to us. And now to have it removed is
Right.
to really suffer. Now you're getting somewhere with your character. Okay. Ron, we spent a lot of time on it, so we will move on. But
Yes, yeah.
I think you're
Sure.
on the right track, and we're
Thank
talking
you.
about all the right things. Um, Abhinav, I like this coming on just as you arrive, and it's sort of the judgmental glare of arrival. The
I need
judgment.
to have a special virtual background of mist in the background, and out of the mist, I emerge like some apparition.
Yes, I like it. I like it. And like in my nightmares, Abhinav.
That'll work. That'll work for me.
um, let's see. Nivedita. Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Oh, great. It's great to see your daughter.
Yes, I think everyone's coming only for her. I'm incidental.
Oh, well, it's great to see her. This is
Yeah.
um, and
Hi. Ah, cool. Cool.
hi. Are you a writer too?
Are you a writer? Do you write?
No.
Only when her teacher makes her write, no?
Just a little bit? Okay, well, that's a start. That's a start. Um, okay, let's talk about this piece a little bit. um, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're going for here, and then I'll have you read a little bit. Oh, Nivedita, I think you froze.
Yeah, I think her video is frozen.
Oh, it's too bad. Um, if she comes, oh,
Yes.
sorry,
Okay, she's back.
you froze a little bit. Let's see if it works, and if it keeps freezing, then maybe go without video, and we'll just talk. But for now, let's try it again.
Yes, sorry about that. So I
No
was
worries.
trying to show the ups and downs, I guess, of someone who who wants to make it big in her world, but doesn't really know how. So I wanted someone who has dreams much bigger than she actually is or knows. And so that is, and that
Oh,
reflects, I felt, in some of her maybe contradictory statements or actions. Yeah, it was just
Okay.
she's just figuring her way out. She has no clue what she's doing, basically. But
Yeah, well, this character is like a tornado that comes onto the page and and really, I mean, I was sort of like, I mean, I wrote it to end. I was like, there's a lot of energy in this prose. So I was, um, I like that energy, but like a tornado. Okay, when we get like your prose like a tornado, um, it's a little bit trouble. You know, it's like not going in a great direction probably, but
yeah,
your prose like a tornado. Has a great deal of energy, but destroys everything in its wake. No, I'm kidding. I'm being funny now, but it's it does have a lot of energy. Um, I what it doesn't have, like I mentioned, is like control, right? I mean, this is like I think what Nivedita, you got to take it as you know, like if someone said I was a tornado, I think I'd probably be pretty pleased with that. You know, and definitely there were times in my life that I definitely wanted that above all things. So I think that that is a great place to start. Then, un- yes, unfortunately, it's to start to control it, to make it a force that goes in the directions that you want it to.
right.
Um, because the problem that happens for me as the reader is
Mm,
that like like I write this comment here.
yeah.
Actually, I'm gonna have you read a little bit too. So why don't I have you read just this first section? Sorry to hear this, just this opening. We'll just hear that from you if we could.
Yeah, from Parichai, right? Oh, from the
No,
beginning.
no, no, no. Just from what an ass.
Oh, okay, sure. What an ass. He didn't promote me this year also. Both my thumbs fly on the phone keyboard. This is after being top rated for the second year in a row. I put my best this year because he had promised to consider my promotion during last year's review. I paused to sip the cooling coffee on the cafeteria table next to me. It is machine coffee and almost unpalatable. I want to bring down the flimsy paper cup cradling the brew on the once white lino table with a smash. I want to see it spill uncontrollably in all directions, splashing and staining those standing too close to me. The way he talks. His appraisal discussion should be used to show others how not to do one. I'm raging to Veer. We have been together 3 months, and by now he's used to my saying things that he doesn't understand.
Okay, great. I do actually. Where's old Veer? I like Veer. He's my kind of character.
Yeah, and he doesn't come well at
Okay.
the
Oh,
end.
can you can you just read um
No, no,
just read this
maybe.
little section of Veer where Veer responds, okay, on the text.
All right. My phone pings pleasantly, and V's replies flash in succession. What, babe? Which is this asshole that said no? I'll beat him, love. Anything for you, my baby doll. He ends his message with a string of kissing and love emojis.
Okay, I like this guy. Okay, he's like to my heart. You know, who is this? I'll beat him. Anything for you. He's just like a. I mean, he's like a person that like you better direct appropriately. Okay, because he's he's a problem. I like that. He reminds me of like you know they have these movies. I'm thinking like Snatch and you know a couple of these like English movies, you know, with like gangster movies, and he's like one of these thugs, you know, that's just like totally like lovable in his loyalty, but also, you know, terribly violent. Okay, so these are there are a couple things that I think that this is I think you haven't, you know, the way you're expressing it about this character is really interesting, but this is my overall impression. Okay, my overall impression is that the consciousness, right, the writer here and allied with the protagonist, they're kind of right like this. They're these two things that are together. And they're basically looking outward at everything. They're not I'm going to say something that's kind of maybe a little bit complicated. The
Yeah.
subject of the story is the protagonist. And we, as the writer up here, have to get the protagonist onto the page. What we have here is we have this kind of protagonist and narrator who are together and they're just looking at everyone else. Does that make any sense? They're like, she's looking at, right, her direction, her mind basically is pointed at this guy who wrote the review. I think Parache is another character, right?
Yeah.
She looks at Parache. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. And then later on, she'll give a lot of backstory about Veer. So she's always looking at other people, right?
Yes.
That's fine. That's fine for a character. The character can be like that, right? And you can understand the character like that. But the writer, the narrator has to know that our subject of the story are not these other people, whether they're good people, bad people, jerks or not jerks. They are not the subject. The subject of our story from the writer's point of view is this character. She is going through a collection of struggles. Struggles are happening to her, and she's moving along, and she's going to have what we call an arc of character. Something is basically going to happen to her over the course of the story that, if not changes her, at least gives her the opportunity of change. For the reader, and this is actually, this relates to what we were talking about with Ram. I am the reader. What I want to do is I want to basically join with your protagonist. I want to be her. I want to live life walking in her shoes.
Yes.
I want to undergo her struggles. For that to happen, though, I have to feel the connection between me and her. I have to know also that the story is about her and not all the jerks in her life.
Right. Yes.
Right? And I want to do that. I want to, we talk about the willing suspension of disbelief. I open up this story with the willing suspension of disbelief. I want to be her. But now we're going to talk about a couple specific things. The key is for me to be able to attach to her. So I basically described this as we need to do two things right away. Our beginning of our story needs to allow us to know what the struggle is. Oh no, we don't want to lose her. Oh no. How old are you?
How old are you, Chola? Apropos.
4.5.
Hi, 4.5.
4.5.
Okay, 4.5 is correct.
Mommy, but I don't want to go.
You don't want to go? Okay.
Okay, but you're 4.5. My daughters are 10 and 13, and they would, I'm sure, would love to be your babysitter.
And then 13 are want to play with you. Yes.
Who wants to play with me?
This my teacher, he has daughters. Akkas are 10 years old. You are 4. They are 10 and 13.
Mummy disturb bana देंगे बा अरे मम्मी क्यों हुआ
I'm not on mute. It's okay. Okay.
Yeah, it is okay.
Continue. I'm sorry.
I would like to say my partner with my first child, our first child, we were both in graduate school. She would go with the baby to her graduate Shakespeare class, because what can she do, right? I mean, she had to take care of her child. So she went to the class at the university, and so basically my older daughter was exposed to Shakespeare like earlier than almost everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just talk about a couple things.
Yes.
So the essential thing is for me to know that I'm getting involved, and I'm basically, we talked about avatars. We basically use the protagonist in our story as they become an avatar from my experience. And so we need to get them on the page. We need to know what the conflict is. That's basically the external struggle. So like, what's going to happen? What does she need? She needs money to pay the rent. Okay, that's an external struggle. But what's the internal struggle? That's the thing that I connect to, that we need to know. Like she wants respect, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, or something like that, something that I can say, I also want respect, which I do. The human struggle that we all share. The external struggle is particular to her,
Mm.
but the internal struggle is universal.
Mm.
And that's the thing. And I was talking to Ram about that, you know, Hemingway's one true sentence.
Yeah.
We have to knock that sentence out of the park. It cannot be fake. It has to be,
Mm.
and so then I connect to it. What happens here is that I'm having trouble connecting because one, it's very difficult to start in dialogue. I will suggest to almost everyone, let's not start in dialogue. It's been popular, but the problem with it is that when I read the dialogue, I don't know whose point of view I'm in. That's where you're focusing your attention in the protagonist. So I don't know where my point of view is, and I don't have any sense of my location. Human beings, I always go back to human beings. It's like if you didn't know where you were and you didn't know where you were located, I mean, think for yourself. You'd be scared, actually. Like like if you couldn't see anything, if you were suddenly, you know, like that, you know, that scene in the movies where they put a bag over your head and then they take you places. Okay, we watch that very casually, but if that happened to you, you would be scared, you know, a lot, right? Because we don't like that. We don't like not knowing where we are. The opening here is a little bit like having that bag over your head,
Mm.
right? We don't want that. So that becomes a little bit tough. The next little thing is that texting, and I'll say this, I honestly say this about a whole class of things. So if I were to have texting, we want to create tension. The way we create tension is we get characters on the page together. Because there's nothing that makes human beings more tense than other human beings. This is it. I would go back to Ram again. This is the conundrum of life. The conundrum of life is that we want to be close to other human beings, but we're also terrified of other human beings. So this is it. You know. So when we're texting, we don't have two human beings.
Mm.
So we don't have the tension that we might want to have at the beginning of our story to involve and engage the reader in a dramatic situation.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, I'm telling you, I will watch my partner, her name is Zandi, and she'll be texting furiously, and I'm telling you, I'm not interested. I hate to say it. I don't care. I'm not like, what's the drama? I'm like, just make my coffee and get back to my writing. So that's already a little bit difficult. Phone calls, it used to be phone calls. We don't have phone calls anymore, but it used to be phone calls. Also don't work in fiction pretty much. I even will say, beware of your dinner scenes. There's just not enough going on. If you want characters, if you want to create tension, you want to create situations where your characters are doing something,
Mhm.
and then ideally doing something that display their characters,
Yes.
right? So that's something that we can think about.
Right.
This young woman here, she now has this sort of violent thing with the cup of coffee, and I'm just being truthful with you. It's like I wrote, I find myself leaning away from this aggression. Like if I saw someone at the table, you know, texting furiously and grabbing her coffee and drinking it, I might again just move away. It's not something I want to do, but it's like it's psychologically I move away from someone who seems to be having a great deal of distress, but I'm not perceiving what's causing that distress. So
Okay. Mm.
you know what, you know how we say this sometimes? We sometimes say, I don't really like this phrase, but we need a sympathetic protagonist.
Yes.
I don't really like that because that it should not be. Sympathetic is different than pity. Okay? And it might be that the beginning of this is supposed to make me pity this woman, but we don't want pity. Sympathy is that sense of resonance. It's a sense of like I can feel that her internal struggle is like my internal struggle, and that makes me feel like I'm going to learn something through her process. But luckily for me, I'm going to learn it safely. I'm not going to have to deal with Parache, or this crazy man Veer, who I think is kind of great, But anyway, I don't have to or this the appraiser. I don't have to deal with all these people, so I can just do it safely. But I want to see her interacting with them. Okay. Then the last thing that I'll say is here you do okay. So I marked. I will just okay. Everyone knows. Okay, this is backstory. Okay, I have a little story that goes along with backstory. I had a professor. He was a mentor to me. He was a wonderful guy, very acidic, and a lot of people didn't like him. He could be really, oh boy, he could be something. But he was little and he was smaller than me. So I finally found him, and like in the hallway, and I grabbed him by the lapels and I pushed him up against the wall and I said, "John LaRue, tell me 3 things I can really use," because I was very frustrated with my writing. This was at Stanford. And he said, the first thing he said was, write backstory only when you absolutely have to. That was number 1. Number 2 was, dialogue is something characters do to each other. And number 3, I have forgotten. Okay, so that's on me. I will never know. So what happens in this piece is that you write a lot of backstory. So the story is not actually, stories are basically, when we open up a story, it's like an announcement. We're like, you got to read this. We're telling our reader, you have to read this. It's amazing. You will not be able to turn your eyes away. This is a life-changing event. The things that happen here are going to change a person forever. She's never going to see the world the same way again. That's what we're announcing. But when we include backstory, it's like we're saying, but we don't really have to tell the story yet. And so for other people, you can see that I've basically marked the backstory here with this orange. Yes. So we have very little going forward, and we have backstory, we have backstory, we have backstory. You want me? We have backstory. I'm only continuing to do it because I know it amuses your daughter. We have Veer comes on. This is front story. He comes on, he texts something back. I'm thankful. I'm like, thank you, Veer, for coming. And then now we have Veer's backstory. More backstory. I think I might have stopped doing it at some point. Anyway, I think the rest of it is still backstory. So we basically, it's actually really good work because you're working out what's called the development of the characters. The backstory is not the story. I know I'm losing everyone if I'm losing your daughter, though. Okay. The backstory is just the stuff that happened before. The characters arrive fully formed. They're ready to go. You do have to do the work to figure out who those characters are. You're doing that work. But it's development work. It's not the story. If you want to write those backstories, then you have to start earlier.
Yes, so that was one of my questions, but I think I'll figure it out as I rewrite it.
Yeah, you just put the pressure on yourself. This is what we do. We put the pressure on ourselves. We kind of be like, right now you have this great force, right? You obviously are really involved and you know these characters and you're typing away, and that is awesome. So now you're just sort of like, okay, I have all this energy. I'm a tornado and I can go anywhere. And now it's like, oh, well, but Otis is telling me I can't go to backstory, so I can't go there. And then he's probably telling me I can't write the future either, which I am. So I have to write the present. So what's happening now? And what's happening now? And what's happening now? And what's happening now? So we begin to control that great energy. I think it's a great start. Okay, we better move on.
Otis, I had a question here. So what is the difference between a backstory and a flashback? And say, and I'll use an example from a story that I'm writing. So about 2/3 of the story takes place in the present. but about 1/3 of the story takes place in the past, 1, 2, 3, 4 years in the past. So how do you differentiate between the two? And what happens in the past is not interspersed throughout the narrative, but it's one contiguous section in the book.
Remind me of that. I didn't quite catch that, but let me get to what's the difference between flashback and backstory. Okay, so first, backstory is everything that we start the story here. That's our front story. I'll call that the front story. So the front story is the story of the present. It's not the future, and it's not whatever's happened before. So everything before the start of the story, basically that first line that we write, ideally, is backstory. So a flashback is something that a character can have in a story. So basically, it's like having a memory. It means that the character is having a flashback. Now, it's a little bit like it's basically like a thought, right? So for me, I have my rules, my basically like the rules. They're like the rules of life, kind of, except for they're used for my purposes. Characters only have thoughts when they're triggered by something in the present story, right? So there's a trigger, there's a thought. I looked up and saw a seagull flying overhead. I hoped I would not get pooped on, I thought, right? So there's a seagull, and then I have my thought. And then I opened my umbrella. This is how I will always do it this way. This is a pattern that I suggest to everyone. You have a trigger, you have a thought, and then you have an action that's a response to that thought. That means that the thought was integrated. You don't say, I saw a seagull flying overhead. My Uncle Bernie is such a nice person. I got on the ferry, I remembered my Uncle Bernie. He always said, you're going to be, no. It's got to be a direct cause and effect. We're always working with the situation of A plus B equals C. I saw the bird. I thought about poop. I opened my umbrella. Right? 1, 2, 3. Flashback is basically an extended thought that reads imagistically. That's all. It's basically a flashback is imagistic thought.
Okay. Got it.
That's not to say that you can't, I mean, you can create patterns in which you have one storyline and then you alternate with another storyline. So like, let's say, I think that The English Patient was like this. I barely remember that. It was a beautiful book, but I can't remember a single thing that happens in it. But I basically think that they operate with two storylines, right? There's one that starts with the English patient is, in this cave being treated by this nurse. And then there's the story of him in warfare. And they go back and forth. That's two timelines. They might be associated with each other, but usually we don't worry about it. So that's because we're basically creating a pattern there. And we think of human beings are pattern makers. Once we establish the pattern, then they will expect the pattern to be continued. We do not want that pattern to be more than they can conceptualize. So there might be a pattern, probably a maximum of 3 things, but I would not do 4. Because now you're going into confusion, and that's one of the heads of Cerebus, and that means you're going to have your reader flee your book and all do,
Got it. Thanks for that. That really clarified.
That's how I think about it, and I mean, I think about it in these ways. I mean, quite honestly, to help both my teaching, to see what I see is like not working, and then find a way to express it. But I also try to simplify all these things for myself, because the thing about us in writing is a tremendous power. Nivedita, this is the thing, right? You can write anything. All of us are able to type, and we have so much language inside us. We can write any language we want. So it seems to me we need simple things. I need them as much as anyone. I can type anything on earth. how do I control it? How do I keep that story going from A to B? Because otherwise, the experience of the reader is one of chaos. It doesn't necessarily feel like chaos to me because I'm the creator. I love just typing and imagining things, and that's great. But I need to do something in order to keep that reader involved. And so I come up with these, pretty strict patterns, and they're strict patterns because I do not follow them. I am telling you, I do not follow them. I write and then I look and I say, and believe me, it's easy with your work to say this, and that. It's very hard with my work. What I want to say with my work is, it's done. It's perfect. That's what I want to say in my heart. But instead I say, wait a second. I have a completely disconnected flashback here because I simply want to wax poetic about the importance of libraries in society. And that was a joke about the libraries.
By the way, I see
Okay.
that Karen has raised her hand. Karen, do you want to go ahead and
Oh.
ask your question?
Hi, Otis. Thank you. So I had a question for you
Yep.
with respect to sympathy and pity. So I'm trying to write a story about domestic violence, but how much tension is too much tension? And when does it move from being sympathy to just pity for the character?
Right. So I think that I think, we can think about it as unfortunate or not unfortunate, but we probably want to stay away from pity, because I think that what pity is distance. I think when we pity someone, we've moved away from them, basically, psychologically. We're like, they are lost. There's no hope, right? And we basically cut our losses psychologically and move away into other areas where we can feel hopeful. We're just human beings in that way. Sympathy means that we're close. So the difference between sympathy and pity, I'm going to say, and like I say, I think a lot about distance. The difference between sympathy and pity is that sympathy is like this, sympathetic resonance, and pity is like this. It's me looking at this person, but I'm looking at them as an object of pity. I'm looking at them as an object of pity, as opposed to having that sort of sympathetic resonance, a kind of joining, feeling. So that's regardless of the material. That would be the case in everything, basically. If you're dealing with very difficult material, I think what we end up focusing on is that we have to make sure that we understand and we feel that sort of sympathetic connection with the protagonist's struggle, and that we as the writer understand that they have the power somewhere along the line to succeed. Does that make any sense? So maybe I'll tell you this this story. So this is where I got this idea. I'm drawing it out of really, my whatever, away from the past. But I read this story. I was in a workshop actually in the Rocky Mountains, and I read this story and I found it so disturbing. Actually, it was not. I guess it was. I felt pity, but like in my training, I felt pity kind of without the distance. Like I felt really an empathetic connection with the character who was under such duress. But it was actually a very unpleasant experience for me, and it was an extremely unpleasant experience for me. And if it hadn't been in a workshop, there was no way that I would have been able to read that story. And what I sort of deduced later on was that the way it was written was that there was no hope for the character. They were trapped. And and that's not a description really of the environment. It was a description of the mentality of the way it was written. It was actually a description of the writing. And the difference was because I've found that I have read things that have been absolutely horrific and been able to read them. I mean, I read Jerzy Kosinski's Painted Bird. I mean, I'm not going to suggest that to anybody, but somehow I was able to read through that whole thing. I'm not sure that I still could, but I was able to when I was younger. But the thing that stories do is they have a narrative. We work on a narrative. Narrative is a sequence of events. That means this happened, but then the next sentence is the next thing that happens, the next thing that happens, and the next thing that happens. And our drive is we want to fill the reader with anticipation for what the next thing is, and then we want to surprise them with what it is. And so in this way, we're always moving on into the unknown. Even if the circumstances are very, very troubling and dire, basically for the character, the fact that we're moving in a progression suggests to the reader that there is hope. That the character is continuing to do things, and we also function. I think this is also very important to it. We do not, in general, we don't write characters who are simply victims of their experiences. We write about characters, protagonists, even if it's very difficult circumstances, actually doing things. Because if they're doing things and not simply being, let's say, tortured, basically, right, where they have absolutely no volition whatsoever, they're actually making choices. And in that way, we can hope that they make different choices. That was kind of a long explanation, but when we're dealing with very difficult material, and we do deal with very difficult material, I think that that's the way we're able to do it. Because if we don't do it that way, it basically is too much for the reader, and they won't read our work. And that's that's I think just the way we are, because we can't have that. In a sense, all of us are struggling to survive, and we need a positive and kind of hopeful outlook in order to survive. We understand that that's really necessary, and we don't take that well to having that erased. Some psychologists call this self-esteem, right? We actually have a need for self-esteem. We cannot have the feeling that our lives are hopeless, because that doesn't serve us in our survival quest. Karen, did that make any sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for clarifying that for me. Thank you. It points to some of the challenges I'm facing when I'm writing it. And one day I'll send it to you. It's just not ready yet.
Yeah, well, the key, I mean, I've read so many things, and I've worked on so many different kinds of material. The first step is to get something on the page. But the other thing that I'll say about really difficult material, and I've done a lot of work in memoir, I do feel this way, and I don't know what writers do. We take on challenges, solving the challenge of getting other people to read our work. That's our fundamental challenge. And I think it's the one that drives us to our best work. So we just have to keep thinking about that. It's like, when your friend sits down and tells you about their horrible experience, and you can feel in yourself that you're sort of like, they seek commiseration, but you are also, moving away a little bit. That's not what we're trying to create with our reader. We're trying to get them to come close and basically feel safe. And what I was going to say about the memoir was that I noticed that, I would have some writers, and it can be very difficult work to have them move away from writing a work that was basically about them being victimized, right? Which I think some people who write memoir think that that's what memoirs are. They're about who's been victimized the most, kind of, it's a competition. but they would write about being victimized. But in their writing, my experience of their writing is that it was actually self-traumatizing. It was reinforcing the narrative of their victimization. And that's not that for better or worse, it's not a lesson that the reader feels like they're going to be empowered with. They're not empowered by that lesson. And so it's not good for them, but I also don't think it's really good for the writer. So I mean, I've done a lot of very difficult work trying to encourage people to see the power in your character, no matter how much the forces allied against them seem to be overwhelming. Recognize that individual. This is why stories are about the triumph of the human spirit. That individual is struggling to survive. They are doing things to survive. And then I think we owe it to our characters as we arc them, not necessarily to have them have a Hollywood ending and everything ends happily ever after, et cetera, but at least to give them the choice to either ascend or to kind of go down in flames, but that's its own sort of, but I did it my way, right? Kind of idea. I think we do owe it to our character to bring them to that point where they have a choice. So that we see that there is the capacity for the triumph of the human spirit. Our character, no matter how bad it is, are stronger. They're stronger than we think they are. And that's what we're trying to pull out of our characters. And that's what we're trying to give I do see it as a gift to our reader, because it's that message that gives our reader the sense of empowerment to deal with their own struggles. That's the big thing that we're doing. So I think you're doing the good work, and it's not easy work.
Thank you very much, Otis. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Nivedita. Let's talk about Deepa's work.
Hi, Otis. Thank you. I thought you were going to stop for the day.
What time are we at? No. Let's try and do your work. I was hoping to do Ram's other work, but we'll just give him one today. But let's try and talk about your work, Deepa. And then you have to carry on. You have more work to do. So we got to get these pages done and then new pages.
Yes.
So just give us a short preamble about what's going on here, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
Okay, this is an extract from an ongoing novel. The main character is Abhayam, and it focuses on her romance with her neighbor, Swaminathan, but also on her self-development as a woman in the 10th century, or, the pre-modern times. An intelligent, smart woman who loves to learn, and also especially who's on a path of self-discovery and spirituality and all that. So in this passage, what we are seeing is she has a tough mother and a large family that she needs to take care of. And so while her inner world clashes with her outer world, and that's the tension I wanted to bring out. And even though her father is an ally, he isn't able to do much. So I'm setting up her world with its tensions.
Wait, the dad's not able to do much. I don't understand that. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
But that's the reality in a family, because the dad is always outside, especially with girl children. They don't have much say. The mother's the more powerful figure in how the children are brought up.
As it should be. We're just the wild card. Well, great. Let's why don't you read to there? So we're gonna go through this first part, and then the mom sort of interjects, calls her inside, basically, from this sort of this experience that she has.
Okay, great. So Abhyam absentmindedly doodled on the sand with a stick. She made the central petal of a lotus, double-lined as usual to signify auspiciousness. No column was ever drawn in single lines, unless, of course, there were pulli columns, the complex, snaky lines around a matrix of white rice powder dots. Abhyam's single lotus petal was quite shapely. It was round at the base, enough to support more petals to be drawn, and curved ever so gracefully to a sharp tip. Then, instead of drawing more petals on the sides, Abhayam drew a petal within the same contours, starting at the same base, but the tip falling short of the larger tip. And she drew a third petal within the second petal, same base, lower tip. Suddenly, the petals changed to look like the third eye of Shiva, the one in the center of the forehead of the great god. She drew an eyeball in the middle of the central petal. There it was, the open Agnya Chakra, the energy center said to be in the middle of the forehead, the meeting point of the brows. Then suddenly, as she stared at it, the petal within the petal seemed to her like the folds of a deep private self. She had bathed enough babies to recognize the female organ. Ouch! Stop this mind of yours up here. Amma is right, perhaps. This is what you get for letting your mind run wild. She chided herself. But she couldn't stop looking. And suddenly, Abhayam saw all three simultaneously, a vagina, an open eye, and a lotus bud. And in a flash of vision, something dawned in her. Mother, I see. I see, her heart cried silently, a vague lightness in her head, suddenly making her dizzy. Her eyes were covered in tears, and now she couldn't really see, but in her mind's eye, she saw clearly the symbols in her little doodle. It is the same. It is the same, she cried. It is the same, the same, the same. Same, same. The high of excitement now settling down into a steady understanding. From shame to same. That's the journey one had to make. It was all so clear. Avayam, Indi Avyam, her mom's sharp cry broke through the reverie. Will you kill your mother in her old age? Is it too much to ask for a sip of hot water when a body is resting for a short nimisham or two? After all that I do for everyone, my pran and breath is ebbing, asking for water. And what does my firstborn do? Sit and daydream. Besh, besh, wonderful.
Okay, great, thank you. So I read whatever. I have a bit weird reading habits, but anyway, I've been reading Sumerian epics recently, but I've been sort of delving into. Well, I was reading something about the origin of language and Homo erectus and those ancient histories, and it's like, like there's these figures of women, that are, it's like basically the first thing that's ever been made, maybe some of those hand prints inside the caves, and then there's these figures, and this is where, like, I don't want to get down on colonial structures and all that stuff, but like, you have these people at the British Museum, they call him a Venus, right? And a Venus is like the god, the Greek god, much, much later. Oh, wow, that's way, way later, right, than these images. It's a Greek god of love and sex and, like, aren't they a mother? Aren't these figures mothers? I mean, if you think about the Paleolithic and you think about like the most ancient peoples, how amazed they must have been at motherhood. I mean, how mind-boggling it must have been to them. And that they should have basically create a figure. They're not thinking deity, or they are or they aren't, or whatever they're thinking, right? But they're creating the shape of this very intense experience that's involved in their lives. And then you have the British Museum calling it a Venus. It's like it can make you a little bit upset, But I try to stay relaxed about it. I like how this, this piece reminded me of this, and I don't, how I don't know if you've been here before, but I always love to, sort of pick on Ram a little bit. But like, what you do so well, Deepa, is you write a process. This is what we saw in your work last time. You were writing about the making of the column and this character who comes out and all of this. You write processes so well. And I'm going to say something that's ridiculously intense right now. Narrative describes a process in time, right? Narrative is a sequence of events, that sentence by sentence. And so like Ram, you know, when you're writing, she at first she liked this attention, but then she didn't, or whatever you wrote, right? That's a summary. And what you need to write instead is the process of that, right? Step by step. Here in Deepa's work here, your attention to this process of revelation is really, really good. And when you take me, this is what narrative is doing. It takes me through this process. And so when we get to the end of this paragraph, what has happened to me, right? I don't want to be too like crazy about it, but it's like, I've had the revelation from the point of view of this girl. Now I take that and I move on with the story. Can I be happier? Yes, I can be a little happier. Yes, but we'll get to that. No, that's a joke. I'm completely happy. I am having an experience. Have I had this experience? Have I done this drawing? Have I had this insight? No. Have I read about it and had this and done the drawing and had this insight? Yes. This is what I want. Very, very, very good. Okay. So the comments on this are going to be honestly, they're going to be really good, but they're really a very high level. Okay, so you're doing so much here in regard to that process, and I really like the way you take your time with that. And then, right, and the juxtaposition of these two paragraphs is also really good because we have this deep interiority, this deep interior process, and then we have it broken up by the mom yelling at her about very mundane things, right? So that's also okay. Can we please give it up a little bit? Diametric opposition is our friend, not so-so opposition. Diametric opposition. She's having this intense spiritual internal experience, and she's diametrically opposed. Not just opposed, not just kind of vaguely opposed, diametrically opposed by the mother's mundane world. I will tell you, not to be a spoiler, the mundane world is also important, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure that will develop in this piece. It's not nothing. It's not for nothing that the mom is, right? The mundane world, you know, is not nothing. So I think that's because you don't want to have a straw man. Right? You don't want to have, oh, the intense interior spiritual world is, well, here we are. This is the side we're on. And the mundane world is, oh, well, the mom is just a mundane mom. No. Because that means that we don't have, we might have diametric opposition, but we don't have equality in the diametric opposition. We don't want that, right? Because if the spiritual life is much more important, so obviously more important than the mundane life, then we don't wonder what's going to happen in the story. It's going to be like this, right? This side wins. The minute I read the beginning, I already know the ending. I don't need to read the story. It's not a struggle, actually. That's not a struggle. That's a bully, right? Or if the spiritual is nothing and this world is, you know, and the mundane is all powerful, right? This actually, Karen, this goes back to your story a little bit too, you know, what you were asking me about your character. The reason the victim story doesn't work because it's a little character under this great force of all the things that can victimize that character. That's not a story. I sympathize with the reality of that in the world, but it's not a story because I don't wonder what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen.
Right.
Right. So and that little piece of information, I think to me is so affirming. Like just going back to that other story for a second, it's like we may see this person as small, but we know that when we put them in the story, that they are equal to the task. They must be equal to the task. These two forces must be equal forces. They cannot be different. Otherwise, we're writing propaganda. We're not writing propaganda. We're writing struggle and outcome that affirms for us the triumph of the human spirit, which is really confirming for us our capacity to engage in this struggle and to have hope for an outcome. I mean, it's a beautiful task. Okay, so the high level stuff that we're going to get to with this is that I'm going to try and encourage you, and you tell me if this makes sense to you. You have an omniscient narrator. I want that omniscient narrator to be objective and not engage in any subjectivity. So okay. That way you, so if the narrator is subjective, right? If the narrator has a personality, that omniscient narrator, that means we're probably not getting a fair shake. The thing that about human beings is that we have bias. What we want to try and do with our omniscient narrators, limited omniscient narrators, is we want to put them on the page so that they seem as if they have no bias. We as an author, we have biases, but we're not putting us on the page. We're not on the page. We're the author. The author writes the narrator tells the story, right? So this narrator, if they're objective, that means that they're not predetermining who they're favoring, whether they're favoring the girl or the mom, whether they're favoring spirituality or whatever. But if they have personality, then we know that they're like a human being, and we wonder what their bias is.
All right.
So the little things, like we just say, tell me how to pronounce her name again.
Abhayam.
Abhayam.
Abhayam. Abhayam is without fear. Bhaya is fear. Abhayam is without fear.
Abhayam. Okay, I'm not sure I'm not pronouncing that right. I'm so looking forward to my trip to India and then my study and when I'm going to then be able to pronounce everything.
When is that, Otis?
I hope it's so soon. Okay. Abraham, so absent-mindedly, who thinks that? So this is the first thing we go, who's thinking that?
Right.
She can't think for herself that she's absent-minded, right? And it's also kind of a subjective opinion. So we don't want that. Abraham doodled on the sand with a stick. She made a central petal, a lotus, double-lined to signify auspiciousness. That's all fine, but as usual, I cut. These little things are suggesting, and it's so funny how language works, because what they're telling me about is your brain and how it's working. You're there, you're in it a little bit. And I'm going to try, which is fine. You write the words, then we can look at the words, and then we can work on the words. And when we work on the words, we create a different consciousness. Even though you wrote it in the first draft with this one consciousness in which you were involved, you're going to revise it and take that out. Right. That's going to give us a much nicer and starker contrast between the narrator and what they're writing and your main character, your protagonist, and the way she experiences the world, which will be subjective, right? She will perceive the world through sensory experience in objective ways, and you want her to do that, but she will also have subjective interpretations of those experiences. Creating this contrast between the narrator and the protagonist makes the work so much more interesting, basically. Contrast is the way we see things. Contrast is how we see. And so now we're perceiving something that's more complex than what you were originally presenting, right? And I'm not trying to prefigure what your biases might be or where they might have gone should we have not done this intervention. But the sense that there's just one story being told from one perspective that includes both this character, she's right, and the narrator is also right, and it's, you know, the author has their bias, and then we have these other characters, the mundane mother who is now maybe wrong. That's only one side of the story. And we do not try to write one side of the story, because what we're writing is this dynamic struggle that we do not know the outcome of, and that we arrive at an outcome. And so, and if we proceed with our work in that way, that means that something actually amazing is happening for you as the writer. And then the reader actually gets to experience that amazing thing too. But we're basically using this as a construct to lead us to, in a sense, a kind of enlightenment, to some new territory that we don't already have. We do not use the story to, I know what the outcome is going to be here, and now I'm going to write it. No, we don't want that. We want to create this dynamic experience. You are at the start of that, but now I'm just trying to get you to sort of maybe control it a little bit and have that as a motivation, so that the experience for the reader can be even more dynamic, basically. But it's do you understand? It's a very high level comment.
Got it.
But I think that if you are getting it, and then you just try to do it. That's all we do, is we just try.
Right.
You're going to really create something amazing here in this work.
No, I hope so. Thank you, Otis.
Yeah. A lot of, I love this world. You're drawing me right into it. What's the period? What time period are you placing this?
Oh, so I was thinking 10th century, when the Brihadishwara temple was being built, that great temple of Tanjore. And last time you said, why don't you put it in the same town? And I'm going to try and do that later, but it comes much later.
Oh my God, I'm so looking forward to this book.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a wrap.
It sure is. So I think you have a couple of pieces of Ram still pending. So I think if enough people send in their pieces over the next few days, or definitely by Friday, then we will have enough pieces to do our session next Sunday.
I see that Rohini is here, so I know that she's, you know, she knows that I have not read any of her work for a long period of time, and that makes me sad. So
I'll send you something, Otis. I'll send you something.
Okay,
I'm working on it.
Don't forget the work. Do the sending. The sending is the important part.
I will.
And we will have this session put up on YouTube in a couple of days, as we do with all other previous sessions, where you can watch them. Just search for Indica Books Open House with Otis on YouTube, and you'll find all past sessions there. And we will talk to you next Sunday.
Great. Thanks all for being here. That was so much fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.